Have about 1 minute. Vanessa, you may begin anytime.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this public forum with the candidates for the United States Congress, Pam Gullison and Kevin Cramer. I am Vanessa Pfeiffer-Johnson with the League of Women Voters, and I will be your moderator this evening. This candidate debate has been organized by the League of Women Voters of Bismarck, NDAL, and is co-sponsored by Dakota Media Access and the Bismarck Tribune. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that promotes the informed participation of all citizens in their government. The League does not endorse or oppose candidates or their political parties. This is intended to be a respectful exchange of ideas. Our purpose this evening is to inform voters with information about the candidates and their positions on issues that affect the people of North Dakota. The audience here tonight is asked to reserve applause or other comments until after the forum has ended. Tonight's debate format is as follows. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. Candidates are asked to comply with our time restrictions so we can get to as many questions as possible. Our timer will let you know when you're down to 30 seconds, then 10 seconds, then stop. Following responses to the question for both candidates, we invite them to engage in a dialogue about the issue raised in the previous question for no more than 3 minutes. The first person to have answered the previous question will begin the crosstalk. Now, let's get to know our candidates. Each of you will have 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us why you are seeking election to the United States Congress. Mr. Cramer.
Thank you, Vanessa, for lending your skills. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this forum. Thank you to all of you for whom this is really the most important. You're the voters. Democracy demands involvement, and the irrevocable gift of your time this evening demonstrates just how important democracy is to all of you. I want to also introduce my wife, Chris, who's with me. She's my partner and the mother of all 5 of our children, who range in age from 31 to 5. And Chris and I became grandparents a couple of months ago, and that's really probably what I want to focus on the most tonight in answering all of the questions. Is not just my generation or generations ahead of me, but the generations behind us. I also want to say thank you and acknowledge my predecessor in public life, Jim Fugely, who's with us tonight. He was my predecessor at the Department of Tourism as the director, and he built, I often say, Jim, to all the marketing classes now that I teach at the university, that it was Jim Fugely who built the first real tourism department, and it was after that that we've all just been enjoying building on your success since then. I think you're doing a great job, Mel, but it's good to be with you tonight as well. I also want to thank Pam. This is our 3rd time together, and we're not even halfway done. Pam and I have agreed to be together at several forums and debates, and I think it's a testament to, first of all, the incredible access that we have in North Dakota to public officials and candidates for office. It's a blessing not only for the voters, but it's a blessing for us as well. Because when you rob yourself of that opportunity, you not only rob the voter of the opportunity to have a say in democracy, but you rob the public official of the wisdom of the voters. So I look forward to a rigorous debate tonight, but a respectful one, and that's as you said, and we've had a couple of them to this point, and I expect they'll continue that. So thank you again for the evening. I look forward to the continued debate.
Thank you, Mr. Cramer. And Ms. Gullison.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thanks to the League of Women Voters, everybody who had a part in putting this together tonight. I appreciate it greatly. I think that debates are important. You get to hear directly from us on our views on these issues, where we stand, and more importantly, how we want to help solve them. It's one of the reasons I've been traveling all over the state of North Dakota. I've been to over 80 communities since I started this campaign, reaching out, talking to North Dakotans about what's important to them. That's been a really important time for me. And I so appreciate them taking the time to share their thoughts with me. My husband Bill and I farm and ranch in Sargent County. We farm with our 3 sons, Lance, Cody, and Cameron. They're the 5th generation of Gullisons to be farming in Sargent County. We feel so incredibly blessed to be working side by side with them each and every day. My husband Bill is here. He's back there in about the 3rd row. Frankly, we're in the middle of corn harvest, and I'm surprised he's here with me tonight. But it just shows how much he supports me. I've been a farmer and a rancher all my life. I grew up on a dairy farm. I know a lot about hard work, and I know how to get things done. It's one of the reasons I'm running for Congress. We have such big challenges in front of us, and we need to start facing them. We need to reduce our deficit. We need to get our spending under control. We need to balance our budgets. Our senior citizens need us to come together to start working to solve the big problems regarding Social Security and Medicare. And we need to pass a farm bill. We need to get this country on track for energy independence, and we need to do it right here by focusing on our domestic energy production. And we need to get people back to work again in this country. We need to focus on jobs, and we need to remember that made in America needs to matter again. That's some of all the reasons I'm running. There are so much more. These are big, big challenges our country faces, and the only way we're going to do it is by coming together, working together, setting aside the partisanship, and get on task to be able to solve these big, big challenges for our country. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the questions developed by the members of the League of Women Voters and the Bismarck Tribune. It is to note that the candidates have not been given copies of the questions before tonight. First question, Mr. Cramer, Congress left much work to be done. What one chamber approved, the other would not consider, with few exceptions. If elected, what would you push Congress to accomplish in the first 100 days after new Senate and House members are sworn in? Realistically, what would you hope to accomplish for our country in the first 100 days?
Thank you, and that's a great question. And some of it will depend on whether or not we really do face sequestration. So I'm going to, for a moment, for the purposes of this question, assume that the lame duck Congress is going to deal with some of that, and we're going to start fresh. I think one of the first things I want to do is to get in there and start reining in the overburdensome regulations that are being forced on our businesses, on our families, on our farmers by several agencies. We can begin with the Environmental Protection Agency, one that I see coming at us every single day from my 12th floor office in the Capitol building. We are on a track right now to seeing a federalization of regulations that belong with the states. And we need to, first of all, stop what's going on now, rein it back, and make sure that we can bring federal regulation back where it belongs to the people that live with the consequences of the regulations. So one of my very first things I want to do is to pass legislation, much of that legislation, as you said, that has passed the House, and get it back up into a bipartisan debate and discussion, and see if we can't reach across the aisle to our friends on the other side and the friends in the other chamber and the administration, and start getting some reasonable compromise and passing some of these bills that will rein in the regulations, free up the states to regulate as they ought to, and then unleash the entrepreneurial spirit that I know is waiting to be unleashed in this country.
Thank you. Ms. Gullickson.
Well, I'd get ready to work on the farm bill. I'd pass a farm bill. I'd work on both sides of the aisle, to those urban members of the House who don't understand it, to the leadership in the House side who chooses not to pass it. I'd work very hard to bring people together, and I'd pass a farm bill. Second, I'd start working on jobs. This country needs more jobs. We need to grow the economy. There's no better example than what we're doing right here in North Dakota on energy development. These are real jobs. I'd pass a production tax credit. Just yesterday, we learned that 350 people are getting a pink slip because they're losing their jobs in Grand Forks because of the lack of passing a production tax credit. Those are just some of the things. My opponent and I disagree on that. He doesn't support the production tax credit. I think it has to be part of our all of the above energy strategy. And as I said before, these are real jobs. This is what puts Americans back to work, and it's good for this country.
Mr. Cramer?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, when my opponent refers to the production tax credit, that's the production tax credit on wind development, and it's a credit. It's 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour that's paid for every kilowatt hour that is created by wind development. We've invested heavily in this country and in this state. I've overseen 1,500 megawatts of nameplate capacity, wind capacity in this state. But we have a $16 trillion debt. And while it's okay to invest in early emerging technologies, and we're seeing the advancements of some of those technologies, the early wind turbines that I cited were 0.5 megawatt, the new ones are 3 megawatt. We're seeing advancements. But we can't afford a $16 trillion debt and to continue to subsidize forms of energy when we have other forms. We are blessed in North Dakota. We have the lowest electricity rates in the country. We have the lowest natural gas rates in the country, giving us a competitive advantage in the global marketplace, not the least of which is the incredible wealth that's created by the fossil fuel industry in this state. So let's not pick the winners and losers of public policy and tax policy and incentives, but rather let's unleash the free market and let the decision makers be the consumers. We can do that, but we have to deal with this debt, and passing more subsidies doesn't deal very well with the debt.
One of the best ways to deal with the debt is to get people back working again, grow the economy. That's how we bring more taxes into the tax base. And this is one perfect example, something we do so well in this state. We're the Saudi Arabia of wind. We have all the potential in the world. And we have an industry, a wind industry, that has really just gotten on their feet. We need to give them more long-term certainty. That's the kind of investments, that's the kind of smart investments that we can do as a country. Because again, it meets our overall goal. It reduces our dependence on foreign oil and other sources of energy. It allows us to do more with renewables, and it gives certainty to a very strong industry.
Do either of you have questions for the other?
Well, I would have a question. First of all, how does wind energy diminish our dependency on foreign oil? And secondly, if it's such a strong industry, why does it require a subsidy from the taxpayers to keep vibrant?
Well, let me address maybe the second one first. We've given long-term tax certainty to the oil companies. We've given it to the coal industry. Those things are there long-term, and I don't dispute that. I think they should be there. I support that. I think it meets our overall goal. And with regards to wind, it's one more component for our overall energy portfolio. It is so important. It allows us to focus more on what we're producing here as a nation and not be reliant. It's one part of it. What we've learned now is that where we used to be about 60% dependent on foreign oil, we're now down to about 42%. So we're making progress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is time. You get the next question, Ms. Gullickson. What, if anything, do you think should be done about the fiscal cliff of budget cuts and tax increases that face the nation in January? Or what specific areas of the budget would you propose or support changes on the revenue side, expense side, or both?
Well, the fiscal cliff is a real problem. We've got to start addressing the debt in this country. We've got to start growing the economy. That has to be a combination of both. I would start by looking at this. We're spending $3 for every $2 we take in. We're borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar from foreign countries that we're competing with directly. We can't continue that. So my solution is we need to ask every single agency to come forward with reduced budget. We are going to require it of them. It has to be part of their responsibility to help us rein in what we know is out of control spending. And we do that by asking, I think, a 5% across the board cut. And it's not going to be easy, we know that. But we have a good example, what we saw just happen on the Senate side with regards to the Farm Bill. That was a bipartisan effort. Our two senators, Conrad and Hogan, led the effort. They identified 9% in cuts in that budget. So it can be done, and that's how we need to start.
Mr. Cramer, would you like me to repeat the
Please.
What, if anything, do you think should be done about the fiscal cliff of budget cuts and tax increases that face our nation in January? For what specific areas of the budget would you propose or support changes on the revenue side, expense side, or both?
Well, first of all, I think it's difficult to ask every agency to come in with a budget cut, but then propose a subsidy like the production tax credit in wind. I think this is going to require some sacrifice. First thing I would do is roll back the federal budget to 2008. Before stimulus, before Obamacare, before TARP, before the bailouts. Because the reason that the United States Senate under Democrat leadership hasn't passed a budget is because they've been building on this false floor that is based on all of these spending things in the late 2000s. And so, but by not passing a budget, they just get to build on that with continuing resolutions. We need to get back to that as a baseline. Then I think we ask our agencies to come in with reduced budgets. I think 5% is a fine way to do it, and I think every year they ought to come in with reduced budgets until we balance this budget. That's not to say they're all going to live with exactly the same cuts. We did this in the Schaefer administration. I submitted 4 budgets in the 8 years that I was on Ed Schaefer's cabinet. Every budget was lower than the previous budget. And look at the foundation we built for this prosperity that we enjoy today. Budget fiscal discipline is so new to Washington, it would be a culture shock. There's no question about it. But we have a $16 trillion debt. Our grandbaby that was born 2 months ago, Lila, was born with over $50,000 debt to the federal government. That doesn't even include her part of the the unfunded mandates. So fiscal discipline has to be restored at every level.
Ms. Gullickson,
Well,
comment?
yeah, I don't disagree. But I look at the Paul Ryan budget, a budget I think that my opponent supported. And you look at the approach that budget takes. Deep, deep cuts to really important programs. Education, veterans programs, Farm Bill, sort of across the board things that may help grow this country long term. But what it doesn't do, doesn't ask for any sacrifice from those in this country that have done so very well. What it does instead is it offers an additional $150,000 tax cuts to the very, very wealthy. When are we going to start asking those amongst us who have done so well to help start contributing to resolving this debt, bringing this debt down and helping grow the economy?
This is the kind of class warfare that is very unhealthy in our country today. When you talk about the upper 1%, the very, very wealthy is not paying their fair share. They're paying 40% of the share, that top 1%. And they're the ones that are going to create wealth, create jobs, create the entrepreneurial opportunities. And by the way, many of these subsidies that my opponent talks about go to millionaires. There's a millionaire. Let's cut the millionaire subsidy. Let's say if you're making over $1 million, you don't get a subsidy for your farm. If you're making over $1 million, you don't get a subsidy for your green energy program or any number of other programs that are subsidized by the federal government. Most of the subsidies coming out of the federal government go to wealthy people. Let's start there, and then let's also flatten our tax code. Let's make compliance easier. Let's create fewer loopholes. Then the wealthy are pay more. But we're going to provide the certainty that investment needs, and we'll unleash the entrepreneurial spirit in this country, and we'll grow the economy while growing revenue. But let's keep that budget lean.
Any questions?
Well, I have a question. I don't know how he can defend the flat tax. A flat tax is a huge shift to the poor, to the middle class, from the upper levels. It does nothing to bring down and strengthen the middle classes, which is what we have to focus on. And it actually increases the burden on farmers, on a lot of small businesses, because it increases all taxes to that 23% for inputs.
See, what it does is it lowers the tax rate for everybody, and more people are going to pay into it. But the mitigation is the certainty that it creates, because certainty is what the investment community needs. And then guess what? Then we can get back to creating jobs for the middle class, instead of a perpetual welfare state where 47% of the public don't pay any income taxes. I don't apologize for a statement like that. That's unsustainable in a free society. That's not how capitalism works. That's not how our founders designed it. I have faith in our free enterprise system. So I don't have any trouble defending a flatter tax. I think people would welcome filing their taxes on a postcard.
Well, can I respond?
In your next time.
Okay.
Mr. Cramer? Historically, North Dakota has implemented Environmental Protection Agency policies and rules in the state. Recently, the state has found itself in conflict with the EPA on mercury and CO2 emissions for coal-fired power plants and hydraulic fracturing related to oil and gas development. So define the proper role for federal agencies dealing with energy and the environmental issues here in North Dakota.
Well, it ought to be rolled way back. Let me tell you something about our environmental protection in this state. Not only have we implemented EPA regulations, I do it every day of my job, Department of Interior regulations, BLM regulations, the Office of Surface Mining, which we oversee. In fact, we just got a glowing review again this week on our implementation of the Federal Office of Surface Mining, coal mining reclamation laws. The reason we do it so well is because we live here. I resent the fact that some Washington bureaucrat thinks they love my clean air more than I do. I always tell the pipeline companies, I've cited billions of dollars worth of pipelines, gas, oil, CO2 pipelines in this state. You ought to have more to fear from the landowner than you do from the bureaucrat. The proper role of the federal government is to set the standards by legislation, not by bureaucratic mandate, but by legislation by the elected representatives in this country. And then there ought to be a backstop. There ought to be a federal backstop. But by and large, you ought to trust the people that live on the land that is being developed, that has the minerals on it. The reason North Dakota is leading the way in energy development isn't just because we have more coal, more oil, more gas, and frankly more wind than everybody else. It's because it's all on private land, where state regulators and private enterprise and private citizens have more to say about it. This 62% down to 40%, the reason we've lost it is because so much of it is on private land. But though that energy on federal land has actually shrunk.
Thank you. Ms. Gullickson, could you repeat the question? Yes. Historically, North Dakota has implemented the EPA policies and rules in our state. Recently, the state has found itself in conflict with EPA on mercury and CO2 emissions for coal-fired power plants and hydraulic fracturing related to oil and gas development. So define the proper role for federal agencies dealing with energy and the environmental issues here in North Dakota.
Well, it probably won't surprise you as a former state legislator that I really think that we should focus most on how we can use the state to implement these. We have the Clean Air Act, we have the Clean Water Act. Both of those have allowed state agencies to help implement that. We need an EPA that doesn't fight that. We need an EPA that starts working with us on that. We need an EPA that doesn't change the rules in the middle of the stream, as they have on a number, including the coal ash. I think with regards, I think they have overreached. I think this is one area where I'm probably not that far apart from my opponent on it. All of this, if you think about these industries, agriculture, energy, all of this, these are the kind of things that our federal government needs to be working with us on to help support us and be partners with us instead of penalizing. So I support the state's right approach. I understand EPA is going to have some general oversight, but it should not be in the punitive way that they've been doing it. It needs to be in a collaborative way and start working with us.
I have a number of members of the Public Service Commission staff here tonight. One of the things I always tell them is our job is to help companies comply with the law, not punish them. And that's, by the way, what companies want to do by and large. Here's the problem. If my opponent were to succeed and Nancy Pelosi were to become Speaker of the House, Henry Waxman becomes Chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and all of the progress we've made in this state and other places, frankly, will be lost. See, the regulations that the EPA and the other regulatory agencies are carrying out today are the same ones that were there 10 years ago and 20 years ago. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. It's the zeal of the regulator that needs to be reined in. And so it's important for Congress to step in, use their oversight power, use their appropriation power if they need to, and to make sure that the regulators are carrying out the will of the elected official rather than the agenda of the far left.
Yes.
Any comments?
Well, believe me, I'll have no problem taking on anyone with regards to EPA or anything else that's good in terms of North Dakota's future and for their business development. That's what I've done before. I testified last fall against EPA and on behalf of the state of North Dakota on the regional haze issue. because I knew that they were wrong, they were overreaching. Our state health department was managing that issue very, very well. In fact, we're below the standard. So I'll take them on at any turn. But I do have one question for my opponent. He is a state regulator. It is your job. You uphold regulations on behalf of the people of North Dakota. And in that capacity, you've accepted money from the very interests that you regulate. I think that's wrong. And I think that you have an ethical obligation to explain that to the people of North Dakota and to explain why you're using taxpayer dollars to defend that action.
Let me ask you something. If you're a legislator and you're being sued by some far right-wing extremist group, wouldn't you be glad to have the Attorney General of North Dakota defend? In fact, the Attorney General of the United States of America is defending me in that lawsuit. In fact, there's not a single prosecutor or public lawyer in the country that's on my side of that issue. We do that because if we didn't protect public officials from frivolous lawsuits from far extreme groups like the ones that are suing the Department of the Interior, no one would run for public office. Let me explain my rationale for accepting those contributions and seeking more of them. Because the basis of a free country, the basis of democracy, is that those of you who are regulated by the people you elect get to elect them. You, the voters, get to elect your leadership. If you're a farmer, you get to donate to and elect the ag commissioner. If you're a teacher, you get to donate to and elect the superintendent of public instruction. And on it goes. That's how democracy is built in this country. We're governed by the consent of the governed. Isn't that great? We ought to applaud it, not apologize for it.
This is a very different thing. I mean, we have to step back here and think about this. This is an action, this is a political action where you've chosen to take money from the very interests that you regulate. This is not brought on by an action specifically of the Public Service Commission. This is your own personal action, accepting those contributions even while many of those interests have cases in front of you. Ethically, that's wrong. None of the people who served in that seat prior to you did that. In fact, they made public statements, said they didn't want to get close to that. They didn't want to cross that line. You always want to make sure that you protect your role as basically a judge in these cases.
Actually, that's not true at all. That's not true at all.
Okay. And I'd like to remind you both to keep your eyes once in a while on the timer. Okay, thank you. Ms. Gillison, given that more than half of all U.S. citizens have at least one chronic disease, such as diabetes, heart disease, or cancer, what can the federal government do to support schools, parents, communities to build healthier lifestyles, prevent the development of diseases, and reduce the rising cost of health care?
Well, I'm a licensed nutritionist. I spent a good deal of my public life early on working as a nutritionist. And I think we need to start right there. I think we really need to turn our whole health care upside down. Right now, we focus really on sick care. We only respond when people are in a disease state, when they've already facing a chronic disease. We need to approach it from more wellness, more prevention. We need to help support people as they take more personal responsibility for diet and exercise and a way to change their own lifestyle. That's how that's the only way that we're gonna start to really be able to rein in these high costs of health care. And it's the only way that we're gonna be able to affect bringing down some of the costs of Medicare and other health care programs that our country manages.
Mr. Cramer?
Well, first of all, I'm not a nanny. I reject the nanny state, that somehow we're going to dictate to every parent how they're going to feed their children. I think that's inappropriate. But I will tell you this, we need to stop the perverse incentive there in things like Obamacare, things like traditional health insurance, that has this perverse incentive for people to get ill and go to the doctor as opposed to stay healthy. There's no incentive to stay healthy in our insurance system. This was a failure of the Republican leadership prior to Obamacare, and it's a big-time failure of Obamacare. I think what we need to put healthcare back into the marketplace. You see, when you want to put price caps, for example, you want to open up borders for medicine and drugs, things like that have been talked about, you squash that free enterprise system again in the United States of America that is responsible for the most advanced medicines and drugs and treatments in the world. And when you create a one-payer system like Obamacare is aiming at, you can squash